We are taught that Delilah was the sole architect of Samson's ruin. We picture the mercenary shearer, the sleeping giant, the sudden tragic loss of power. But the true collapse of a high-performance leader rarely starts with a spectacular public ambush. If you look closely at the ancient Masoretic texts detailing the 12th century BCE, you will find a man who had already executed his own soul. His destruction did not begin in a crowded Philistine bedroom surrounded by enemies. It began in absolute silence, far off the battlefield, in a dusty vineyard near Timnah. This was where a sacred vow collided with a dead lion and a handful of dripping honey. In 2026, modern leadership psychology frequently uses the Samson archetype to describe this exact self-sabotage. It is the tragic pattern where a person's greatest strength becomes the very instrument of their isolation and arrogance. For Samson, the strongest man alive, the erosion of his unyielding integrity started with a remarkably simple, private appetite. From birth, he was consecrated as a Nazirite, bound by a sacred covenant with 3 strict prohibitions.
He could not consume wine from the vine, he could not cut his hair, and he could never, under any circumstances, touch a dead body. These rules are not arbitrary ancient traditions. They were the structural pillars of his identity. His unparalleled physical strength was merely the external sign of this internal discipline. But walking alone toward Timnah, Samson returned to the exact spot where he had recently torn apart a young lion with his bare hands. What he found waiting for him in the dirt was not a spiritual revelation, but an entirely physical temptation. Inside the ash-colored, rotting ribcage of the dead predator, a swarm of bees had constructed a working hive. The carcass was dripping with fresh, golden honey. This was a direct, blatant collision with his vow of ritual purity. The ancient text in Judges chapter 14 is unflinching in its description of what happens next. Samson does not hesitate or turn away from the defilement. He reaches his bare hands straight into the rotting cavity of the beast. The visual is haunting. A man consecrated for holy war, dragging his fingers through decay. He scrapes the honey from the bone, eating it as he walks. But the moral fracture goes deeper than a single impulsive meal. When he finally rejoins his parents on the road, he casually hands them the honey. They eat it, entirely unaware that their own son has just made them complicit in his defilement. He deliberately hides the source of the sweetness. This quiet deception is the undeniable birth of Samson's double life. He has just learned that he can break the sacred rules, keep the secret, and still wake up feeling powerful. Small, private compromises of integrity are always the true precursors to massive public catastrophe. Samson's profound holiness is now proven to be just a performance. The honey undoubtedly tasted like victory in the moment, but it was the taste of a man beginning to consume himself. And as he approaches his wedding feast in Timnah, this new habit of silent arrogance will demand a very public price. That public price is exacted not on a battlefield, but at a wedding table. In Timnah, Samson sits surrounded by 30 Philistine companions, men assigned to him less as groomsmen and more as guards. The air is thick with forced celebration and unspoken hostility. Samson is a man used to holding the upper hand. He cannot resist the urge to prove his intellectual dominance over the men watching his every move. So he offers a wager, a riddle born from his secret violation with the lion and the honey. The stakes are 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. It is a massive sum, a bet he has no business making.
But Samson is operating under the intoxicating illusion that because he is divinely gifted, he is completely untouchable. He thinks he is laying a trap for his enemies, but he is actually building a cage for himself. For 7 days, the riddle goes unsolved. Desperate to avoid the humiliating debt, the Philistine men corner Samson's new bride, threatening to burn her family alive. The human pressure here is immense. His wife weeps relentlessly, begging for the answer. Samson holds out until the final day, then caves to her tears. He hands over the secret.
Before sunset, the Philistines deliver the answer, wearing smug grins of unearned victory. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," Samson spits back, "you would not have solved my riddle." It is a vulgar, bitter insult. He hasn't just lost a bet, he has lost face. And for a man whose identity is built on supreme strength, public humiliation is intolerable. He owes them 30 changes of clothes, a debt he cannot pay from his own pockets. The text tells us the Spirit of the Lord comes powerfully upon him, a terrifying enablement. But look at what that divine enabling is used for. He walks 20 miles down to Ashkelon, a major Philistine city. He isn't going there to liberate Israel. He isn't launching a strategic military campaign. He is walking into hostile territory to settle a personal, impulsive gambling debt. In Ashkelon, Samson strikes down 30 men. He doesn't just kill them, he strips the bloody garments off their corpses. We have to pause and look at this image. The chosen deliverer of a nation, acting as a vigilante debt collector. Imagine him standing over the bodies, violently pulling linen tunics from dead men.
He binds the stolen, blood-stained clothes into a massive bundle and hauls them back to Timnah. He throws the garments at the feet of the men who answered the riddle. That pile of bloody linen is the true tragedy of this chapter. It is the undeniable proof that a divine calling has been hijacked by a human ego. Gifts without character turn the intended liberator into a mere predator. We see this frequently in modern leadership, the high-performance trap. It happens when a leader or a visionary begins to believe their exceptional talent excuses their lack of ethics. They assume their anointing gives them permission to bypass basic decency. Samson leaves his own wedding feast in a raging fury, returning to his father's house alone. His wife is immediately given away to his best man. The bridge is burned. He has alienated the people he was supposed to judge and the enemies he was supposed to defeat. He is entirely isolated now, operating strictly on impulse and grievance. And as his thirst for vengeance drives him deeper into Philistine territory, the boundaries between the sacred and the profane are about to vanish entirely. The boundary between the sacred and the profane doesn't just vanish, it is deliberately crossed. We find Samson miles away from his people, deep inside the heavily fortified Philistine city of Gaza. He hasn't come to liberate Israel, he has come to visit a prostitute. Gaza is hostile territory, the belly of the beast. The moment the Philistines realize the great Israelite judge is sleeping within their walls, they lock the city gates, they surround the perimeter, they wait for dawn to kill him. The trap is perfectly set. But Samson doesn't wait for morning. He rises at midnight. In a moment that should call for quiet repentance or strategic evasion, he chooses pure, unfiltered arrogance. He doesn't just escape the city, he decides to humiliate it. He walks to the towering, iron-bolted wooden gates of Gaza, the absolute symbol of Philistine military security. He doesn't try to pick the lock. He tears the massive doors, the two side posts, and the iron bar completely out of the bedrock. Hoisting them onto his shoulders, he begins to walk. And he doesn't just drop them outside the city limits. He carries these thousands of pounds of wood and iron nearly 40 miles up a steep incline to the hill facing Hebron. Imagine that silhouette in the moonlight. A solitary man, his muscles straining under an impossible load, walking for hours in the dark. It is a terrifying, awe-inspiring display of raw physical dominance. To everyone watching, it looks like a total victory. But look closer at that lonely walk up the hill. This is not a holy crusade. It is a spectacle of power that serves absolutely no one but his own ego. He is literally carrying the weight of his own defiance on his back. Samson equates his intact physical strength with divine approval. Because his muscles still work, he assumes his soul is fine. It is the ultimate delusion of the high performer, the belief that extraordinary external results can somehow cancel out internal rot. In 2026, leadership psychologists study this exact phenomenon, calling it the Samson archetype. They define it as the character competence gap, a dangerous condition where a person's raw talent and ability to generate phenomenal results far outpace their ethical maturity.
We see it today in the executive who posts record-breaking numbers while their private life is in absolute shambles. They become unteachable. They assume their extreme capability exempts them from the rules and boundaries that govern everyone else. Lifting the Gates of Gaza was the worst thing that could have happened to Samson because it reinforced his deadliest illusion. He survived the lion, he survived the massacre at Ashkelon, and now he has effortlessly dismantled the strongest prison in the region. He is completely intoxicated by his own myth. He thinks he is untouchable. He doesn't realize that the Spirit of God is a covenant, not a battery, and he has already severed the line. The physical blinding is still to come, but his moral blindness is complete. By carrying those gates, he mocked his enemies, but he also mocked the vows that made him who he was. Performance has become a dangerous mask for a profound lack of purpose. He is a hollow colossus, waiting for a slight breeze to push him over. He has proved he can physically break out of any trap the world sets for him. But a man who relies only on brute force has no defense against a quiet room.
He survived the iron gates. He won't survive a whisper.
By the time Samson reaches the valley of Sorek, he is a man hollowed out by his own legend. He has spent years weaponizing his divine gifts for personal vendettas, moving from one compromise to the next until the boundary between his calling and his ego has completely dissolved. Then comes Delilah. We often paint this as a sudden ambush of beauty, but the text suggests something far more clinical. The lords of the Philistines don't send an army, they send a check. They offer her 1,100 pieces of silver each to find the secret of his strength. This isn't a romance, it is a siege. Delilah asks for his secret directly, and Samson responds with a game. He tells her to bind him with fresh bowstrings. He wakes up, breaks them like thread, and laughs. But the laughter is forced. He's playing with the very thing that makes him holy. She tries again with new ropes. Again, he breaks them. Then she weaves his hair into a loom. Each time, he watches her prepare the instruments of his capture while he sleeps. He isn't being tricked. He is flirting with his own destruction because he is fundamentally bored with his own power. The tragedy of the strongman is isolation.
Samson has no peers, no advisors, and no family left who can reach him. He is a solo act that has gone on too long. He stays in that house not because he is blinded by love, but because he is exhausted by the secret. The Bible uses a haunting phrase, "His soul was vexed unto death." This is the breaking point. Delilah's nagging isn't just noise, it's a constant scraping against a conscience that is already raw from years of compromise. He just wants the noise to stop. In a moment of catastrophic vulnerability, he hands over the truth. He tells her about the razor that has never touched his head. He tells her he is a Nazirite. He hands her the keys to his covenant just to buy a single night of quiet on her lap. Notice that Samson doesn't say his strength is in his hair. He says it is in his vow. But the vow was broken in the vineyard and the harlot's house long ago. The hair was merely the last visible thread of a contract he had already set on fire. Delilah sees the change in his eyes. She knows this time it's real. She doesn't cut the hair herself. She calls for a man to do it. While Samson sleeps, the physical sign of his separation from the world is methodically removed. 7 locks of hair fall to the floor. Then she cries out the familiar warning. "The Philistines are upon you!" Samson wakes up and says, "I will go out as at other times." It's a chilling line. He thinks his charisma and his muscle are still his own. He doesn't realize he is now just a man. The text says he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. This is the true definition of destruction. It isn't the loss of hair or the loss of sight. It is the moment the presence of God leaves a room and you're too arrogant to notice the silence. The Philistines don't kill him. They want to humiliate the man who burned their fields. They seize him, and before the sun sets, they bring out the steel. Not the steel of the razor, but the steel of the hot iron to ensure he will never see the sun again. They lead the world's strongest man through the Gates of Gaza in chains. He had carried those very gates on his shoulders once. Now he is led through them as a trophy. The fracture is complete. The secret is gone. The eyes are dark, and the hero is a slave. But the Philistines made one mistake. They left him alive to work their mills.
In the darkness of the grinding house, the man who was destroyed by his own ego will finally have to face the silence he tried so hard to avoid. Next, we see what happens when the hair starts to grow back. When the hair starts to grow back, it doesn't begin with a sudden surge of power or a miraculous escape. It begins in absolute, suffocating darkness. The Philistines have taken Samson, bound him in bronze, and gouged out his eyes. He was hollowed out by his own legend long before the razor touched his head. But here, in the dust and the dark, a slow reconstruction begins. The book of Judges notes a seemingly minor detail. His hair begins to grow again. This isn't about the keratin returning to his scalp. The hair itself never held magical properties. It was always a sign of the Nazirite covenant, a vow of consecration to God that Samson had systematically treated with contempt. The tragedy is immense, but the restoration is real. Samson has finally realized that the Spirit of God did not abandon him because he lost his hair. He lost his hair because he had already abandoned the Spirit. The Strongman has been broken, but the story is not over. The Philistines are preparing a massive festival to celebrate their triumph, unaware that a blind man who has found his conscience is far more dangerous than a sighted man fueled by ego. One final act remains. The tragedy of the strongman's paradox is that the urge to destroy everything around you usually peaks exactly when you realize you can no longer control it. We find Samson in the Temple of Dagon, a broken man standing between 2 central pillars. This is not the glorious martyrdom you were taught in Sunday school. It is the final reckoning of a leader who spent decades hollowing himself out. He finally realizes he has become a weight that can no longer stand. Archaeological excavations at Philistine sites like Tel Kasil and Tel Mikne reveal exactly how this scene was physically possible. These Iron Age temples were built around 2 central wooden pillars resting on stone bases, spaced just over 2 meters apart.
This specific architectural design meant that the entire structural integrity of the building relied on a single point of failure. Displace those two central supports, and the massive roof, crowded with thousands of spectators, would inevitably cave in. Imagine the tactile feel of that cold stone under his scarred, calloused hands. Samson is blind, humiliated, and reduced to a prop for the amusement of his enemies. He asks a servant to guide his hands to the core of the building. In modern leadership psychology, particularly as we look at the burnout and self-sabotage trends of 2026, we call this the strongman's paradox. It is the dangerous phenomenon where a person's greatest strength becomes the very instrument of their absolute isolation. When high-stakes leaders face cognitive overload and the collapse of their own authority, they often default to a destructive response. Analysts call it the Temple-Toppling Impulse. If the system no longer serves my ego, I will bring the entire structure down on top of us. Listen to his final prayer in the book of Judges. He does not ask God for the liberation of Israel. He does not ask for the redemption of his people. He asks for personal vengeance for his two gouged-out eyes. Even at the very end, his battle remains entirely personal. He is the only judge in the biblical record who never leads an army. His entire life was a solo campaign driven by impulse, ego, and a desperate thirst for retaliation. He pushes with all his remaining might. The twin pillars shift off their bases. The roof groans under the impossible weight and gives way.
The dust cloud settles over the ruins, leaving only silence and the crushing reality of consequence. The Philistines are dead, but Samson died with them. And the devastating truth is that he had been living like a Philistine for decades. His destruction was a self-inflicted death warrant, signed years before a razor ever touched his skin. We are obsessed with the appearance of power, but absolute strength often masks absolute insecurity. When we lose our fundamental purpose, we inevitably weaponize our skills for destruction. A leader without integrity is just a catastrophe waiting for a trigger. Look at your own life and the structures you support. Are you building something that will outlast your ego, or are you just waiting for the right moment to push the pillars down? Public failure is always preceded by private rot. Do not wait for a Delilah to tell you that you are hollow. Do not wait for the darkness of the grinding mill to realize your strength has left you. Check your own pillars before the foundation begins to shake.